clearly, this was a good match. Peter Berg does a lot of action movies, The Kingdom, whether it's Lone Survivor, Battleship, one of my favorites. It's so hokey, it's great. But at the same time, you needed someone to flesh out these characters. Was that really what, you were drawn to this topic, because this really is 22 Miles is a character study more than anything else. I mean, there certainly are action scenes.
I wrote a book called 11 Days that was set in the Navy SEAL team community, and I did that because I had some friends in that community, and I thought if I made really big mistakes, they would help me out. And when the book came out, Pete Berg was researching or shooting a movie set in the same community, and he had spent a lot of time, with people in the Navy, and I think he read the book because he was interested, and he liked it, and he, I think, was confused by how I got the level of detail that he thought I got. So he wanted, I think, to see if we could collaborate on something together. I never expected this would be it, but I think we really balance each other out, because I certainly would not write or even dream up the idea of someone, for example, breaking a window and taking a shard of glass and stabbing someone in the neck with it. But I know what it feels like to be a mother. When people ask, I always say this movie is about mothers and children. Because I really wanted to get at this idea of the government is the mother. Where is the responsibility of taking care of someone? And that probably would have been a very dull movie. Mm-hmm. So Pete brings all of the other skills that I lacked.
Well, you mentioned that Pete Berg was interested in how you got levels of knowledge about these communities, because both the special operations community and the intelligence community are close-knit, somewhat closed-off groups. And in both of your books, you have a pretty extraordinary amount of detail for an outsider, which, we love seeing. Most of the time, you either have someone that knows the community that can't write their way out of a paper bag, or somebody that is a great writer who just gets everything wrong when it comes to writing about the community. And it's nice to see kind of this come together. You're an excellent writer, and you have extraordinary detail in these books, and I'm wondering how you got it.
Thank you.
Because you actually mentioned at the end of no one told you any secrets, but it's clear you talked to people. It's clear that you did your research to prepare for writing novels, which is not always the case.
Well, I'm interested in emotions. I'm interested in human interaction. I was not particularly interested in terms of 11 Days, details surrounding the death of Osama bin Laden or tactics. I was not particularly interested with Red, White, Blue in the politics of the enhanced interrogation techniques debate, for example. I was interested in what is the emotional makeup of people who, in the post-9/11 era, have taken on these extraordinary jobs, because they're sort of aliens in a way. In a good way, and there's some of them sitting in this room, but I think, I was really fascinated. I think everyone after 9/11, hard not to bring it up today, asked themselves, what role can I play here? And I could not have been a CIA paramilitary officer, nor could I have been a Navy SEAL, but I was an English major, and I thought maybe what I can do is write about these communities in a slightly different way. And I think if you are a huge best-selling writer, or you're Peter Berg and you go into these communities, maybe people don't want to talk to you. And I think I was so phenomenally unthreatening. When I wrote 11 Days, I was pregnant. So I'm like a female writer who no one's ever heard of, pregnant, showing up, literally at the gate at Coronado with a friend of mine, walking in. And, I just listened. I really just listened to people. I think Peter was, he's also a good listener. And sometimes if you don't say much, people just keep talking.
Well, you had mentioned that this movie was about motherhood, in different forms. A lot of what you write about are kind of family dynamics, and certainly Red, White, Blue is about family dynamics within CIA, and it's not to give away anything as part of the plot, but it's about the main character's familiar relationship with her father and finding out stuff later on. And to a degree, there's somewhat of a family dynamic between her and the unnamed person who she's talking to there also. These are communities that are many times described as families. Like when you started learning about the special operations community in the CIA, did you realize that right away, that because they're such close-knit, closed communities, that really it's a family dynamic much in the same way as ordinary people or some kind of, drama that you would think of as being like familial?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by family, motherhood in particular, because I am a mother myself. After 11 Days came out, a friend of mine who was married to someone in the Navy said, why didn't you write about the wives? Or sort of raise the question of like, what about the wives? And my answer to that was like, I couldn't go there because I didn't have that experience. So I sort of, I went places I felt comfortable going, and I guess I went outside of my own experience radically in some ways, but I tried to keep certain rules for myself about who I was willing to try and write about and not write about. And I knew for this movie, and I don't know if it works. I mean, I think all of us feel the jury is still out. Any movie with a twist at the end, as I was saying earlier, Pete Berg says if you take an audience to the 1 yard line and you kick them in the teeth, many people will really like it and many people will not like it at all. But we wanted to do that, take people to the 1 yard line and kick them in the teeth. And I wanted that twist and some through line in the film, and I fought really hard for this to be about mothers, and that was the origin of John Malkovich's, being known as Mother, and it was my little way of rebelling from within against the tyranny of the violence and all of the other things that I really admire the way people do, what the people I worked with did in this movie. But it's some of those scenes are just they're amazing to watch, and that was Iko. He choreographed those scenes.
There's an interesting parallel, I think, between the movie and your newest book. It's really an epistemological question, like how do we know what we know? So like the movie, the whole time you're thinking you know something. You're thinking you're understanding something about the world that the movie is existing within. And then the book, really a lot of the themes running through it are about how do we know what we know? The idea of even polygraphs and the idea of what is truth and what is not. And we have a imperfect narrator. Certainly you want to understand the main character might be telling you the real thing, but she's being told half the story from someone whose agency. You have no idea if the story is true or not. Do you like those kind of things where you're kind of questioning what you know and what you don't? Because it seems to be a theme that recurs throughout a lot of your writing, whether it's for the screenplay or for your books.
I hadn't thought about it that way, but
well,
yes.
You're welcome.
Yes, I do like writing about that. The origin of the Jimmy Silva character, the Mark Wahlberg character, I had seen a video that a family had made when they lost their son. He worked for CIA and died not long after 9/11. And this video is absolutely riveting because it looks like a very sort of rough-hewn, homemade documentary, and it's the baby in the crib, and then he's 5 years old, and then he's 10 years old, and then he's 15, then he's graduating from Harvard, then he's getting married, then law school, then the agency, then deploying, and then a very tight shot of his memorial pamphlet, and you see Leon Panetta's name, and it's just it's life sped up, and the life of this sweet little boy blowing out birthday candles, and then he's holding a gun. And I thought maybe, that was really the origin of the idea of thinking about Silva, and that if he, as a child, had experienced something that was unknowable or unfathomable, in the script it's the death of his mother, then he grows up with a sort of immunity to things that are unimaginable, and immunity to violence and all of that. But this idea that what we're looking for is true intelligence and that there's a level of unknowability at all times. That was interesting to me. The case officer character in the book has no name because the idea that you take on multiple identities was interesting to me. Once you've taken on multiple identities, do you ever look in the mirror and, forget what the main one was? So, yeah, we tried to play with some of that in the movie.
You talked about writing what you know, and I kind of think back to someone who's considered, one of the kings of this genre would be like a Tom Clancy, who clearly Jack Ryan was who Tom Clancy wishes he was as he wrote the character. I see some parallels between your main character here in your newest book and you, certainly background stuff from your past. How much of you do you put into your characters? I mean, Lauren, I want to call her the Walking Dead woman. What's her real name?
Lauren
Yeah,
Cohan.
yeah. How much of you is in that character? How much of you is put on the main characters of your stories?
I have smashed a phone against the wall, so that was personal. And I've been divorced and know what that feels like. But she's a fantasy version of me in the same way that what you said about Jack Ryan. If only I had the strength, physical and mental, to do some of the things that she does. I was interested in looking at, a woman in this line of work. And when I got the job, I was basically told, write the story that you like. There have to be X number of action scenes and no romance. That was he was very clear on that. So it freed me up to, because romance is very difficult, to have these characters have a sort of brother-sisterly relationship. But you are always just writing what you know, and you can dress it up or down, but at least I'll just speak for myself, I'm always writing my own experience, and maybe I only had the courage to write about CIA by kind of wrapping it up in a story of, in the case of Red, White, Blue, a marriage, and two people trying to know each other, because it struck me that in the same way that what you're doing as a case officer is trying to cultivate trust, trying to know another person, that is also what you're doing when you're falling in love, and certainly when you're undergoing the challenges that come along in the course of a marriage.
But it's hard not to see. Anna went to Princeton. Anna found out after her father had died that he had worked in the intelligence world. There are clear parallels here. Or did
They were totally accidental. My father lived and worked in China. I know a little bit about his life, not as much as I'd like to know. I was born when he was in his mid-50s, so by the time I was old enough to have an adult conversation with him, it never occurred to me to say, what was your life like, 40 years ago? He had lived and worked in China, and he felt really passionate about China and about Asia. He always told us to learn to speak the language. None of us ever did. I have 5 siblings. And he encouraged us to study Asia and study China and learn from it. And he just didn't want to talk about that part of his life. But yes, after he died, one of the things that I was given by someone in the intelligence community was a declassified Bronze Star citation, and in that citation was the phrase "special operations." And we had a family friend who is an Asia-based diplomat. He's no longer alive, but he loved my father, and he loved playing this kind of parlor game with my father, where he would almost he would berate him, like, admit it, you were OSS, come on, tell the truth. And my father always, waved him away. But he was in World War II and stayed in the military, went back in Korea, and he had an interesting life. My father was not someone who liked to talk about the past.
So we want to take the opportunity to open it up to a couple of questions from the audience before we wrap things up. So if you have any questions, raise your hand. Someone will run over with a mic, and we'll take a couple. So who's got a question? I can always ask more. I like doing that, but I wanted to give other people an opportunity. Don't be shy. There's one up here, Hufua. Yeah. Oh no, sorry, here you go. Here comes the mic.
Lee, do you think you'll stay in film after this? Did you enjoy it?
I did. I loved working with other people. When you're writing a book, you are the CEO of everything. When you write a film, the director is the CEO, and you're sort of. There was a documentary about Joan Didion that came out about halfway through our work on this project, and Pete, the director, called me. He said, "Did you see the Didion documentary?" And I said, "I did." And he said, "You know what part I really liked?" And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "The part where she describes her screenwriting work as basically just making some notes for the director, who's the true artist of the project." He said, "Don't you feel that way?" I said, "I do. I totally do." But when you are writing a book, of course, at the end of it, you have hopefully a great relationship with your editor, and you work very closely with them. On this project, I had sometimes 40 people weighing in on something that I did, and I actually found that kind of freeing. But you're responsible. I mean, when you write a scene where, literally where Mark Wahlberg will use the F word, you will hear from his agent and you will hear from the studio, and in a great way, because everyone's just trying to make this thing work, and everybody has a different point of view, and I found it really freeing to not have to take full responsibility for everything.
At what point in the process did they cast the movie? So when you were writing or revising, at what point did you know who you were actually writing for?
That's a great question. Iko Uwais and Mark Wahlberg were attached when I came on, so I definitely knew I was writing for the two of them. And then after I had one draft of the script, Pete Berg had worked with John Malkovich before, and they had a great relationship, and he said, let's send it to him and see if he would do Bishop, and we did, and he did. And then the rest of the casting happened.
Does that change the way, knowing Mark Wahlberg as your main character, do you write it to that, having, I'm trying hard not to call him Marky Mark, having, knowing his personality, knowing what movies he's been in, does that shape your writing, or did you write it no matter who could possibly play the role?
Yes. I mean, it's possible that, I don't want to name a name because everyone has such strong opinions about actors, but it's possible you could have another actor who would come into a room of a high-level diplomat and say, did somebody lose a dog? But that kind of humor is just, Mark is so very good at that specific thing that we ended up putting quite a bit of that in.
There's a microphone there, right behind you, directly behind you, sir.
Okay. I'm curious about the location. It looks as though it was filmed in Colombia, but it's in sort of an unknown country in Southeast Asia. What's the story behind that?
That's a great question. I'm so glad you asked that question. We wanted to work with Iko. I was told to put no locations in the script at all. And actually, I was laughing with Elliot here that I noticed looking at the movie tonight that the Safe Bakery, a safe house would have been too dull, so we made it a bakery. But that they called it the San Fermin Bakery. And I was saying, there's a San Fermin Bakery in Indocar City. I think the locations were maybe just chosen pretty quickly. I think the idea was, this is a fictional movie. We want to root it in some true ideas, but it's going to be a fantasy fantasy location in Asia. And the last script that I delivered had no locations in it. And it turned out it was too expensive to shoot anywhere in Asia. So then we had to find somewhere less expensive, but also hopefully visually compelling. That became Bogota. The internal scenes were shot in Atlanta. And then the idea was that the team of people that John Malkovich is working with in the room had to be in yet another location. And that location in the script was Athens, but I was kind of given instructions not to give locations, and I learned only later that that's for economic reasons, because they make a lot of those decisions based on where they can shoot relatively inexpensively.
And this cast was extraordinarily ambiguous ethnically. Like, they talk about the United Colors of Benetton, if you remember. I mean, you try to pinpoint nationality, and it was wonderfully obscure about who was what, and
Similarly, I was told, I was instructed to leave that open. I don't know if it works or doesn't work, but the main thing was to make it credible that we were in a country where ECO was working for the local special forces. And to then, with the members of Overwatch, as we call them, the chess pieces, to make them ethnically indistinct. We tried to really steer away from any politics in that way. We just wanted to make a movie that was fun. I hope we didn't make mistakes.
you included every bobblehead, which was, I didn't make sure.
Well, the idea with it's funny how these little things happen. The idea was that this group of people are working together and they have these bobbleheads because that was a fun detail. But the bobbleheads only go up to Obama. And so that then when you see them next and they add a Trump bobblehead, it was meant to cue the audience, now we're in the present day. I don't really know if it read that way in the end, but the concept was strictly to use it for timing.
There's a question right here, yep. Or where, yeah.
Hi. So I'm a veteran myself. So I served in the military, and a lot of the characteristics for Silva, the actual main character, actually were a lot. It seemed a lot like profiling of the main character, like with the ADHD and stuff. Did you study any of those things when you kind of like profiled the character to have this sense of dealing with different mental issues or PTSD?
That's a great question. We really didn't think about it in terms of PTSD. We more thought about it in terms of his childhood. It was more that he had been gifted in a way, that his mind moved faster than other kids, as his mother says, and that this is someone who has almost like a Tourette's syndrome. That he doesn't know when to stop talking. And that's his Achilles heel, but it's part of his gift. But I didn't look at specific mental diagnoses. I more thought of him as someone whose mind is just going too fast, and he's not really socially astute.
We have time for one more question.
I've got a question here. So he kept on talking at the very end of the movie, and he said, "See you tomorrow." So now my question is there a mile 22-2?
I don't know. People seem to want to do one, but with all these things, it depends how the movie does. If people like it and have an appetite for it. I think everyone now, this is my only experience working in movies, but it seems, as we all know, that culture is dominated by a desire to create a franchise. That's what everyone's trying to do, and why not? So we talked a lot about the Bourne movies and how they were structured when we were putting this together, but it's left to the, as Pete calls them, it's left to the movie gods. You just don't know what people are going to think.
Well, it's certainly set up for one at the end with a kind of ambiguous ending. But so Lee Carpenter, thank you so much.
Thank you so
for
much.
taking the time.